Conflict of the Vietnam War and the Compromise of the Paris Peace Accords.
The Vietnam War is seen by most as the war that we shouldn't have been involved with. This documentary will go over the brutal Vietnam War. It will contain details of the fighting, public response, compromise, and how the Paris Peace Accords attempted to solve the problem. The war lasted 18 brutal years, and we lost 60,000 soldiers during this war and gained seemingly nothing. We became involved when the Communist forces, also known as the Viet Cong, attacked the Democratic South Vietnamese. Due to the idea of containment, John Kennedy quickly joined the war in an attempt to stop the Viet Cong from spreading communism around the globe. The belief of containment meant to attempt to stop countries from letting their government become communist. The United States at this time was very anti-communist, and they thought the rest of the world should be too. Joining this war was a very big move for the country, and a message sent to all nations about how serious the United States was about stopping communism. Citizens of America were immediately confused by the decision to join this war, but at this point they still maintained an amount of trust in their government. News stations started returning reports of total deaths to the public through television, which is when most citizens began criticizing the decision to join this war. Television became a very popular medium for spreading information about the war and relaying it back to the public. With this new medium, people were getting more information on this war faster than ever. And seeing these reports daily of the massacre going on in Vietnam, the public began to become restless. The protests began popping up, and people were beginning to get outraged by the resources spent and the lives wasted with the war, and those who opposed the war. When Nixon was elected president, the public was not happy with the decision to continue on with the war. So they began around-the-clock protests all year to influence the decision to escape the conflict. Eventually, after losing countless soldiers and the public's trust in the government, Nixon called for a compromise. Ho Chi Minh didn't want to compromise with how close they were to winning the war. They didn't think it would be worth their time. They had every advantage, and it seemed that the South Vietnam was running scared. Nixon answered this with a spree of bombing runs that came to be known as the Christmas bombings. This action scared the Viet Cong to the negotiation table. After days of the compromises all being worked out and figured out, the Paris Peace Accords were declared and signed. They stated that the U.S. would begin to withdraw the troops from Vietnam until they were completely cleared. Within the next month, soldiers began being pulled out very slowly, and this continued for multiple years. After we began sending our troops home, the South Vietnamese were still at conflict, although without as much of our help. It seemed more like a massacre. The villages were being overran, towns were being ransacked, and it seemed like failure was inevitable. But still the South Vietnamese pushed to protect their homeland. The war raged on until the last soldiers were pulled out. Although most of the troops that were stationed in Vietnam were pulled out, too many to count were killed for this lost cause. The Vietnam War is the only war the United States has lost in its long history of wars. Some believe we were too passive in our approach, should have been more aggressive, because the only goal was to stop communism from spreading to other countries, so we wouldn't have been affected. The majority of the public believed that starting the war at that time period was a bad move economically, and we should have joined when the United States was in a better financial position. Although people disagree on how the war was handled, the Paris Peace Accords was the compromise that saved thousands of lives and helped bring the United States back to a time of peace. Nowadays, people wonder what we were thinking when we began this war. most people just try and forget about it with how brutal the loss was. Vietnam is now a single country with a communist government, one of the 4 nations that still has a communist government. The effects on soldiers of the Vietnam War are still lasting to this day as well. A mental disorder known as PTSD is affecting countless war veterans now, years later. Seeing the brutal events take place before them and watching friends be killed right in front of them can lead to cases of this disorder. Oftentimes they will have violent flashbacks of events that took place, causing them to panic and seize up. There are institutions that allow people with this disorder to find help, but this is still a lasting effect to this day. People are still sad that America forced themselves into this war with no particular purpose, wasting resources, wasting time, and wasting the lives of countless soldiers. People wonder whether the Paris Peace Accords really helped. I mean, the damage was done. It just pulled us out already broken, beaten, and scarred for the rest of America's history. Some think that America is repeating what they did in Vietnam with ISIS now. We're going after ISIS and the Middle Eastern terrorist organization to try and stop them. But people are thinking this may just be a repeat of what happened in Vietnam, where we push ourselves onto a conflict just to escape with less than what we went in with. No one knows yet what will come of that war as it's going on right now, but it shows that America has a great desire to help other nations solve their problems. While it isn't a bad thing to want to help countries get out of hard situations, some think we should let them deal with their own situations, but looking at our history, that won't be happening. And with the hard-fought conflicts that took place and the thankful compromise of the Paris Peace Accords, the Vietnam War is one that won't soon be forgotten.